Good evening, everybody. It's John Pollock speaking, and I would like to think that everybody on Zoom can hear me. So this is just a little sound check. Is that true?
Yes.
Everybody's good on Zoom? Thank you so
We
much.
hear you.
Lovely, thanks.
And the speaker?
And we can hear Micha, yes. When he speaks, we'll hear him. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, welcome. And thank you all for being here. Just letting a few more people into the Zoom, and as you've already heard, I'm John Pollock. I'm one of the co-organizers of the workshop in the history of material texts, now in its, 49th, 75th year, 238th year, we're not really sure. Founded by Peter Stalagras and now co-organized by Zachary Lesser in the Penn English department. Zach sends his regrets for this evening. He's a little bit under the weather. And by Jerome Singerman, who is the emeritus humanities editor at the Penn Press. Jerry also sends his regrets as he is away this week. So you're stuck with me, but you won't have to hear very much of me because we will hear a wonderful presentation by Micha Perry in just a couple of minutes. Let me just do a small bit of housekeeping. Apologies to some of you on Zoom, but this will be partly relevant. For those in the room, we have our usual sign-in sheet that Eileen Malcolm, the spectacular co-organizer of this seminar, is passing around. Eileen is your contact for all things useful in terms of getting on our emailing lists, distribution lists, particularly if there are some, for example, Cat Center fellows on this call who, to whom this seminar is new. You are welcome. You are welcome here. You are welcome in hybrid land, and we hope to please let us know, and we'll put you on our email list. Let me just outline the rest of the semester, because I know this is a time of the year when everybody is just kind of living day to day and hour to hour. Tonight we have Micha. Next week, Roger Chartier will be talking on the skin of an innocent lamb, Jack Cade and the Roman law. And then we have three events following that. One is our online only roadshow, which some of you are familiar with, where we have a group of speakers all speaking remotely. That's April 11th on women book collectors is the topic for this spring. April 18th, Andrew Stauffer and Amanda LaCastro will be talking about their project called Book Traces on 19th century students and library markings in books and collaborative reading. And then, as I think some of you already know, but let me just announce it here again, our last seminar meeting of the semester on April 25th will be a wonderful event prepared to honor Jerry Singerman and his work as humanities editor at the Penn Press. So there will be a variety of speakers and activities on that evening, April 25th. So just wanted to clue you into the rest of the semester. I don't know if there are any other announcements from the room here. Okay. Well, thanks again for being here. It's really a pleasure for me from this side of the room to introduce Micha tonight. He's a new friend of ours and of mine and of the seminar here this year as a fellow in the Cat Center for Advanced Judaic Studies. His topic of research this year is entitled Between Legal Cultures, Pragmatic Documents versus the Law. And I should just note parenthetically that his topic resonates quite nicely with other seminars we've had at Material Texts over this past seasons, including last fall presentations by Ada Kaskowski in history on medieval customary law, by Ashish Siddiq on constitutionalism and constitutional law. And I suspect we will return to some similar questions about the law next week in Roger Chartier's presentation. So when I was a graduate student, a current fad of course naming and book titling and article titling was law as literature. That's really past now, and I don't think anyone uses that lingo anymore. But what I think we are seeing here, and I know tonight's seminar will be a contribution to, is a sort of transnational and transhistorical body of work on law as material text. Micha's home institution is the University of Haifa, where he is a lecturer for Jewish history and a faculty member of the Haifa Center for Mediterranean History. His work focuses on the transmission and reception of knowledge in medieval Jewish history, and I know that is a topic that would be very near and dear to the heart of Larry J. Schoenberg, our great manuscript stoner here at the library. Just want to cite a couple of Micha's publications. His major work, published in 2010, is a book called, in English titled, excuse me for not doing it in Hebrew, Tradition and Transformation, Knowledge Transmission Among Medieval Jews. And a couple of articles to note include one in the Journal of Medieval History, 2017, Jewish Heaven, Christian Hell, Rabbi Joshua Ben Levi's Vision of the Afterlife. And also in 2017, Communal Scribes and the Rise of a Uniform Hebrew Style Around the Mediterranean in the 11th Century, published in Zion. And just to conclude, I want to cite a little book, which I'm holding in my hand, which is a new discovery to me in the Rutledge Focus series. This is perhaps your most recent publication, 2019, a wonderful little book entitled Eldad's Travels, A Journey from the Lost Tribes to the Present. And this is, in a very brief nutshell, a tale of the arrival of a mysterious, mystical figure in a North African Jewish community, claiming to represent knowledge of the lost tribes. And it's essentially a wonderful sort of micro and macro historical investigation of the long and complicated regional histories of lost tribe thinking through this curious figure who, to hear you tell, it sounds like, is still a part of popular culture even today. So I recommend this fascinating little study and hope that history classes near you will be adopting it as a course book soon. So we're delighted now to turn things over to Micha, who is presenting on medieval Jewish bilingual charters, texts, signs, and sounds. Thank you so much for being here.
Let me read it first. So thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank Eileen for all the assistance here, for the emailing, for organizing everything. I want to thank Zach, who's not here, and Jerry, who's not here, and especially John, who put out this wonderful spread here of manuscripts. I'll try to, the examples of some of the things we'll see here, I highly recommend you go up and see them, even while I talk. Feel free to pick them up. I have a lot of grounds to cover here. This will not be about law. Next week I'm giving that at the center. This will be about material textuality. And this journey has started, and you said I'm a newcomer to this group. I feel at home. I feel 100% at home because this journey started when I took a class with Roger Chartier 20 years ago in Paris. And the second semester, he left us and went to Philadelphia. We didn't know why. He disappeared. We went back when he came back in April. And I can't see the people on Zoom, but I know I have many friends on Zoom here, people who are part of my bibliography. And I really thank you for coming over. I put in my email because I'm going to talk about a lot of stuff, a lot of documents, a lot of regions, and it raises a lot of questions. So if I haven't covered your questions, your inquiries, feel free to email me and I'll answer whatever questions you might have. The topic we have today, and I have a lot, so I'm going to speak a bit fast. Why won't it? Okay, so we're talking about practical documents. Just to level the ground here, these are documents that perform something, and they are known from antiquity until this day. They change the status of either the person or property During the Middle Ages and even before and after, they're single sheeted, they're dated, and they're named. So they're a great source for the historians. In Jewish studies, they're even more important. Most of the material, and I put aside, for those of you who heard about the Cairo Venise, I put that aside for a moment, European history. In Jewish history, most of the material we had underwent a long process of preservation, of editing, and that was the subject of my first book, how this was edited and transformed. These were preserved in non-Jewish hands in the archives as they were. So we have access here to non-rabbinic elite, economic elite, quotidian history, economic history. And what I want to do today here is look at these documents from a point of view that for you in this room is very easy to understand, but sometimes I have to give a short introduction about what it is. And looking at them from the angle of the new diplomatics, meaning looking at them not as text, not as content, but as symbolic objects. And I'm following here what I studied from Brigitte Bedus-Rezak and others, but she, I think, is an exemplary model for that. When she talks about medieval charters as symbolic objects, that they were detached from ordinary people's life, and we should look at them as medieval people looked at them, as symbols, as objects, as part of a transaction and not as proof. And what we'll see here is the process, how during the Middle Ages, textuality, literacy, bureaucracy, document as proof, something that became. And we have to forget our modern ideas of documents and legal thought as proof. Just an example of what we have as a document. We have several here. I'm destructing the view with my thingy here. Put it in the middle. So this, for example, is a charter from 11th century Catalonia. We have somebody speaking in the first person, right? In the name of the Lord, ego, Ugoberto. He's speaking. And he signs his name at the end. Ugoberto, do you see the marker? Ugoberto Levita signs here. And then we have the witnesses, Paulo, this guy, and we have the signum, the sign. It's not a signature, it's a sign. It's a visual sign that at some cases, somebody wrote his own name, in some cases, the scribe wrote it, and maybe the guy dotted across the cross or something else, and he put out his name on it. But none of these people wrote the document. The author of the document, you might say, was the scribe that wrote it. In this case, this is Johannes Presbyter that wrote this document. So though the document speaks in the first person, it was written by somebody else. And as Bezalel says, it detached from ordinary people's life, but it was present in everyday life. And we'll see this. When we're talking about Hebrew documents, this is what led me in this research. The surprising discovery that there are dozens, hundreds, no, thousands of Hebrew documents within European archives. Hebrew was an accepted language within Latin Christendom. And the surprising fact that I'll talk about next week is that law ignores it, but we have the documents. So we have charters between Jews and Jews. We have charters between Jews and Christians. And we have charters between Christians that have Hebrew on them. All of these interactions have Hebrew. Even a charter between two Christians sometimes has Hebrew, either as a witness, either as part of a transaction, and we have that as well. We have personal documents, married contracts, etc., that are found in corollaries and registers or property books. We have, we could divide this into personal deeds that relate to marriage, inheritance, manumission, very, very rare, and business deeds, two main types, which are real estate and money lending. Both we'll see today. The last thing is testimonies that people added to documents. Concerning languages, and my study of these documents is part of the project that I'm working on Jews and languages in the Middle Ages, and not what we used to think about as Jews as translators, as transmitters of sciences from Arabic to Latin, etc., but as a history from below, how Jews use different languages in different situations, moving from one culture to another, where for me, languages is a sign of identity. The moment you open your mouth and you talk, before even any content, the language you've chosen, the register of the language already says much about you. So the closest way to think, for me, the closest way to think about medieval Jewish identity, how do they identify themselves? Is through languages. And the best way are bilingual documents. And I found this trove of really hundreds of documents. So we have Jews use Latin, Hebrew in the vernacular, all the vernaculars, including Arabic. We have all these languages in Hebrew script and in Roman script. We find that as well, Hebrew words in Roman script. The whole polyphonema, you can find everything. We have full text, we have bilingual text, we have code switching, also referred to as macaroni text, Latin Farsi, all kind of names for the same thing. I think among medievalists here, it's obvious that we know today that medieval culture was multilingual. Even moving from one region to Italy to another, from one region from France to another, you had to control already 3 languages. So it was we're not surprised that Jews who were merchants and moved a lot from place to another, and carried also an Eastern culture, you might call Hebrew, Arabic, Aramaic, had all these languages. I want to today take 3 examples, quick examples, and try to do something that is possible only because many archivists, scholars, librarians published so many documents in the past years. This allows me to try and do a transnational study of these documents. The problem with studying charters is the national divide. Charters till today are still studied in a national view, which is justified many times. They're in national libraries, they relate to local history, it's very justified. But these documents have a transnational history, they relate to each other. If you look at formula, if you look at form, and they're a great example to see changes within something very stable. So I want to start with Catalonia, where we have the first Jewish deeds. I want to move to England. I'm going to skip Germany and finish with Austria. And if I overstep my time limit, feel free to tell me. I'll stop at a hard minute. What I want to do is use a visual component of these charters. I want to look at them as a picture. Let's look at the relations between Hebrew and Latin as a representative of the relation between Jews and Christians. How the layout of the page, the mise-en-page of these charters are made, and the relation between Hebrew and Latin or other languages between them. So we'll start in Catalonia. Catalonia is a great example because we have Jews here from antiquity, probably, and because many of you were constrained because of COVID to your houses for a long while and couldn't travel, I remind you what a beautiful region this is, and we all miss visiting Barcelona. That was Besalú. And Jewish life prospered there in the Middle Ages. These are all remnants from Jewish life. You have what they claim to be the most ancient mikveh in Europe. Mikveh is a ritual bath. In Besalú, you have the Jewish kal, the Jewish street in Gerona, and you have a stone of a house that was dedicated by one of the sages of Barcelona in the Middle Ages. The first document that we find with Hebrew writing on it comes from Barcelona in the 10th century. This is not only the first bilingual document that we have from Europe, Christian Europe, this is the first Hebrew document at all from Europe. Meaning there's no There's no original Hebrew manuscript from Europe before the 11th century, except these documents. These predate what we have as Hebrew manuscripts, and that's why they're extremely important. Wait, I have to move this all the time. So this is a Latin deed of sale of a small vineyard in a village out of Barcelona, in Cubels. And at the end, you have this Hebrew line, a short Hebrew line. Here it is. I, Judah, made the sale, and I requested the witnesses to sign, and 3 witnesses, each of them wrote his name in his own hand, and there's no Christian witnesses, meaning the Hebrew witnesses uphold the Latin charter. I'll already say that at this early step, this formula is not rabbinic at all, meaning it doesn't follow Jewish law. More so, it translates Latin formula. The Latin formula "rogavimus firmare," we had asked them to sign, is here translated by "piyasti lechutma." I have asked them to sign, and even the grammatical syntax is exactly translated. So already here we see this interaction between Jews and Christians working together. Apparently, it was written by a Christian scribe who signed, by the way, at the bottom. You see, this is also Johannes Presbyter Scripsi et anno qui supra, at the year that's written above. See at the bottom line? Here,
You think he wrote the Hebrew as well?
No, not at all. No, the Hebrew was written by either the owner of the charter or a scribe, but the 3 signatures were done in 3 different hands. So I assume these were the signatories who signed it in their own hand. And I'll say this already, there's obviously a difference of level of literacy between Jews and Christians in the Middle Ages. Jews write with their own hand, they know how to write, they know how to read. There's a higher level of literacy, and nevertheless, these are visual aspects, objects. So we have this with a short affirmation line at the end. Later texts show more developed relations. We have almost half of the page here. We have 2 texts, which is one Latin and the other in Hebrew. And they seem like 2 deeds, legal documents. They're not. The Latin is a document. The Hebrew is what we call an attestation clause. It's a text saying, whatever is written in the above Latin document, I agree to it, it's true, and it brings some of the details of it. Another example of a different kind of document, this is a stratum or a document. This kind of document, which is a certified copy, again, according to Jewish law, shouldn't exist. But here it does, with Hebrew signatures, who translate, again, the Latin formula into Hebrew. Later on, this formula will enter into legal Jewish writing, which will try to confine it and close it into a certain way that will work somehow. But only in this region, it was accepted with limitation. When a 13th century rabbi from Germany comes to Spain, Rabbeinu Asher Harosh, and he's presented with such a document, he said, I've never seen such a thing. I want the original. I won't accept it. So we see how Christian documentary practices influence and infiltrate Jewish habits, and we see it across the board. It's always regional. Some of them move to other regions. What is notable here in the Catalonia example are these nice signatures, which are large and beautiful. You could see them, and you have these 2 sets of signatures, Christian one and Jewish ones, and you could see that the Christian ones have always all kind of Christian symbols. The signa, the signs of signature are all kind of crosses. This is an example of two Jewish bailiffs, in Hebrew gizbar, one from the 12th century, one from the 13th century, who wrote their name on Latin documents. These are official Latin documents. There was no Hebrew beside the signatures of these guys. They signed their name in Hebrew. I assume that the above here is signum perfecto hebreo, the signature of Perfect the Jew. I assume this was the scribe who wrote this, and this Jew signed his own name in his own hand, not the Christian scribe who wrote this. Here you see it's already a bit cursive. You see it's more regular, but these were official people who worked for the Count of Barcelona, and they signed in Hebrew. This was their signature, and this is where I'm going to. If you want to see the relations between these two languages, which one prevails? So the Latin always talks about itself. Ista Carta, this charter, and this charter and that charter. The Hebrew always relates to the Latin, as said in their writing, as said above in Latin. We'll see several examples, as said in their rules. Obviously, the leading legal system is the Christian one. And we have here Jews who submit their documents to a Christian court. Now these are examples of bilingual charters, but we have as well Jews writing charters in Latin. There's no obligation to write in Hebrew. We have other examples of Jews using Latin documents. And we have examples of Jews and Christians conducting their business solely in Latin. And we even have example of two Jews conducting the business solely in Latin. So the use of Hebrew is obviously a linguistic choice. What does this choice say? These two incredibly important people, Ramon Berenger, the first, and his wife, are here buying a county. You see them here. And here are these guys' signatures. You see, this is Raimundos Comes, and this is Almodisa Comisa, right? So you see that obviously these people, as high level as they were, as educated as they were, did not have the expertise of holding the plume, of holding the pen. They could hardly write their names. Their M's are ridiculous. My 6-year-old writes better than them. Obviously, because this was a profession. But still, the signatures are what you put on the paper. This is your identity. And this is your identity marker. And it was always accompanied with crosses, with these huge crosses, a set of crosses. The Jerusalem cross, the Enna cross, you have the crimsons, all kinds of crosses. And my claim, since we have no exterior evidence, is that Jews chose within this context, when they go to a Christian court and they have to mark their identity, they chose the Hebrew letters as their signal. They chose to use Hebrew and not other languages as an equivalent language that could face the Latin. So Hebrew here is not necessarily a content. It's first of all a picture. Facing these crosses, they put the Hebrew letters. Jews try to shy away from symbols, definitely from crosses and other marks. Though you saw a small Star of David on that one. We have some flowery things, but the early ones, you have big, nice signature. And we know that Jews did think that the Hebrew letters are holy, and we had a whole history. So on these charters, the linguistic choice of Hebrew is a visual one, of putting the letters as an identity marker, marking who you are. From a distance, you could see this is a Jew. It's signed in Hebrew. And from Catalonia, at the same time, we see similar uses of Greek also. Catalonian scribes use Greek to mark their names. We have also from France these examples. These are things that the scribes thought are beautiful, are important, are archaic, and they give some festivity to the charter. Hebrew served as the same thing. And in this context, Hebrew was not meant to be read. It was meant to be seen. I moved to England. England is the most studied example for certain historical reasons. I won't go into them at the moment. We have many beautiful bilingual charters from England. In England, they're called starum, that follows the Hebrew name shtar. They were so common that they actually got the Hebrew name into the Latin. These documents were published by a beautiful edition by Judith Schlangel-Olshovi, who is doing a remarkable work on these charters and is also always very generous to cooperate with me. This is a wonderful edition. We have all of them present. Since she published this, she found more such documents. So it's endless. And here we arrived sort of at 12th century England. Jews were introduced to England after 1066, and they were expelled from England permanently until the 17th century at 1290. But they were extremely important for economic life in England. And here we find that Hebrew functions with no Latin at all. This is sort of the peak, the heyday of Hebrew within Latin society. And this is a couple of documents. And I don't go into the specifics. There's a certain type of document. And this is sort of a quitclaim, but he says, I have made this document to be proof for the stereographers. The stereographers were the people who preserved a copy of the deeds. I'll talk about it in a moment. But there's no Latin. This was submitted to Christian keepers of documents, the stereographers, as proof, not even a proof. This is a demand of action, asking them to do something. Now we know that the stereographers were both Jews and non-Jews. So we could assume that in these cases of quitclaims, the Jews translated into the vernacular, into English or French, probably, the content of that letter or that document. But other cases, you see how the patent, the deed, commits something, makes something, and it's totally in Hebrew. In this case, for example, we have a document in Latin between two Christians. One is giving land to the other. And at the bottom, you have sort of attached to it a small scrap of paper that is also a quitclaim, but a certain quitclaim saying that the land sold has no debt attached to it, and that the Jew will not take the debt, any debt due from that land. So what will you have here? We have somebody who's in debt to Jews, and he's selling a piece of land. And the buyer, like when you buy a car today, you want to see there's no taxes on it, or no, it's not somebody else's. You want to see it's a clean title. So the Jews give a clean title. It says there's no debt attached to this land. And if there is a debt, I won't take it from this land. And this happened a lot because many Christians were in debt to the Jews, and they lost their houses, and now the church stepped in and offered them to pay off their debt if they'll give their land as a donation to the church after they die. And the church bought the land very cheap because obviously the land as collateral is worth way more than the debt. Usually collateral was twice the price of the debt. Every time I started going into economics, people started gaze, in a different direction. It took me a while to get excited about it also. But the matter is that the church was using Jewish debts in order to require more and more land, and the Jews participated in this function, as the king was also using the Jews for his debt. But we have the main point here that we have Hebrew functioning without Latin at all. These are several examples of these documents. But even here, we see the influence of the Latin practice on a Jewish one. For example, this is a type of the document we were talking about earlier, the Sirographum. And could I take one of these documents? I want to show you this one. people are both also. So a pserographum is a sort of way to validate a charter. And the way to do it is you do one or two copies, and then you write in bold letters, pserograph, and you cut it. Usually, sometimes it's cut it indentured, right? In zigzag. This is, I don't know if you can see it. This is a wonderful triplet pserograph, because you see it had on both sides. So we had 3 documents here that were cut zigzag, and only when they were put together, they were valid. So as you can see in the slide now, this is beautiful, John. Thank you.
I didn't write it, but you're welcome.
So you see here, Jews adopted this technique, and they write pserographim in Hebrew. They had good reason, because only such documents were accepted for certain transactions. So you see here already the influence of this, and we have many examples. Many of the English charters are pserographs. And Jews also adopt the seals here. So Jews used seal before England, but the first time we have personal, individual seals is from England. This is another way of validating a charter. In this case, we have a father and son, and I would like to think that this is symbolic in some way. Maybe as a father, I don't want to think it's symbolic in some way. The father writes in Hebrew. He's a traditionalist. Hebrew with a Jewish sign marker. He has the tablets of the 10 Commandments, which was identified with Jews because the badge that Jews had to wear in England was the tablets of the 10 Commandments. So he writes in Hebrew, has a markedly Jewish sign, and the son already has something very neutral, sort of a flower, and he writes his name in Latin already. So it might be accidental, it might not, but we see that Jews adopt this as well. And this points that even here, in the highest level of literacy that we could imagine among Jews and Christians in the 12th century in England, where we know that many monks, not many, but monks knew Hebrew and could read it. Even here, these documents were visual and were thought of as a visual. The pserograph system is not you don't validate the charter by its content. You validate it by how it looks, how physically it's attached to each other. The same goes to seals. The apt title of the Blazid Vedasledak's book, when ego was imagio. This is a picture that represents the ego, the me. So Jews adopt this way to validate their own self by a picture. And we have this in other ways. These texts that validate what's written in Latin above talks about the Latin not in content, but in form. These are pictures. Whatever is written above in 17 lines, in the handwritings of this or that, with erasers, without erasers, with this word added at that line. So it describes the content of the document, not by the transaction written in it, but how it looks, how it seems. And we have to, the oral is extremely present here as well. But we know this about many medieval texts, that when they talk about writing, they talk about talking. The verbs are talking. Pelchenot published 100 years ago, the first beautiful article about that. But here too, the document talks, speaks in my name. I won't read the whole text, but you could see it. The document speaks in my name. And the Hebrew word for a document is a seal, a signature, chotam. The whole thing in England was titled a seal. So this is a visual object that we have here, that people look at it from a distance. I marked all these words here in the text. So we should imagine hundreds of people, 13th century England, walking with these charters in their hands, walking with Hebrew text, having them in their cupboards, having them in their, in the sleeves, medieval sleeves, on their shelves everywhere. And the presence of Hebrew made a mark on English culture on several levels. Most of them anti-Semitic ones, but others not. For example, this blood libel described by Matthew Paris to the year 1244, saying about a Christian child that was found mutilated somewhere in London, and they found a writing on his body, and they identified this as Hebrew writing, and they brought someone who could read it, and when they read it, so they had a hard time reading it, owing to the extension and contraction of the skin and flesh. The letter was spread around here and there and much disordered and defaced and some not legible. At length, however, they discovered the name of the father and mother of the child written, but without a surname, and word to the effect that he has been sold to the Jews. Eventually, of course, Jews were put in prison and executed for this. But the way I read it is that English imaginary transformed an actual document into a menace, into something frightening. The body of this boy is a charter written in Hebrew on skin that his parents sold him to somebody. They don't have the surnames because Jews didn't have surnames. Yaakov ben Yechiel, we saw those. So this object that was out in the street, that everybody hold it, was transformed into an imaginary danger, into a blood libel. And we have other examples. This is a time where the ancient story of Theophilus, this is a medieval, starts even earlier, a medieval version of Faustus, of a priest who sold his soul to the devil to become an archbishop or a bishop. And the presentations that we have in the 12th century add a document and a wizard or sorcerer who starts to write a document between Jews and Christians. This is between Theophilus and the devil. This is a time where writing becomes dangerous when it's identified with the devil. And soon enough, the guy in between, the sorcerer, sometimes called Saladin, is a Jew. Here from Lon. You see, he has this triangle hat, is the marker of the Jew. The triangle hat is the marker of the Jew, and the text, many texts, Woodboff and other mention that he's a Jew. This is later manuscript, but you see again the hat on his head, marking him as a Jew. Here he's sort of wedding Theophilus and the devil. Theophilus does homage to the devil, but this story has. So before we get to the happy end, so my point is that medieval culture saw these documents as visual representation of the Jews, and saw the danger, or at least charged it with everything they believed to be that the Jews do about into these documents. The leap from economic reality of seeing Jews as blood leechers to a blood libel, accusing them of actually killing Christians and eating them, it's not such a big leap. And it happens through the visualization of these documents in a way as well. The happy end of the story is that Mary comes and takes the deed from the devil and destroys it. And it's hard, not to see the message in this to Christians. The same Christian that in 1190 charged the Tower of York, killed the Jews, and burned all of the deeds, the charters they had. Mary is very important in England, and Mary is very important in relation for the Jews. Several recent books talk about that. It's very interesting to acknowledge it. Okay, I want to jump to my last example to Vienna. Moving to, we started at the Western March, the Malka Hispanica of the old Carolingian Empire, and we're moving toward the Malka Orientalis, the eastward march of now the German Empire. And we have quite a few documents from Vienna. They were published recently, and just I want to show you an overview. Look at this document, how similar it is to everything we've seen before. England, it looks the same. The Latin text, the Hebrew, well, okay, it's the handwriting is way better, the lining is better, it's a bit, the paper is better, but the document is similar, the function is the same, the Hebrew functions the same. So first of all, this is, for me, this is the basis to have this transnational study. We have a constant that moves from place to place, and we could follow it. But there's also changes I want to point out. I'll skip this. These were published by mainly Evelyn Bruegel and Brigitte Wiedel from the Institut für Geschichte der Juden in Österreich. And this is the 4th volume of documents, and they're going to publish the next really soon. Again, wonderful. I could not do what I'm doing as a historian without the work of all these archivists who's doing, and historians and scholars who do an amazing job. So we have these documents. We have not only bilingual documents, we have full-fledged Hebrew documents. Every type of document that I showed you before, we have similar examples in Germany and in Austria in the 14th century. But there are some things that changed. This, for example, seems very, very similar to what we've seen. But 2 things have changed. First of all, there's a woman who speaks in the first person, and women are extremely prominent in these charters from Catalonia, England, everywhere we go. This is a great source for gender studies and for the place of the women within society and literacy. I could estimate that I think a quarter of the charters involve women. It has a very technical reason because of dowries and marriage contracts and selling property. But here is the first time that she speaks in the first person. I, Judith. I speak in the first person. But what changes is, see again, I, the undersigned. This is, her name is Clemel. But what changes is that it's no longer Latin. It's German. So already in England, we have several, very few, 2, I think, Norman French charters. But Jews were expelled before really Norman French or English came into play with charters. But this is not unique to Germany or to Austria, the East Reich. This happened across the board. During the 14th century, the vernacular replaces the German, the Latin. And the phenomenon that I'll point here in Austria is true to every other place. Mainly I'm talking about Spain and Italy at the moment, but it's similar there. So the moment that Jews had a negative attitude toward Latin, we know this. If you compare Jews in Spain or in the East and their attitude to Arabic, and you compare that to Jews in Europe and their attitude to Latin, you see a huge difference. Jews don't read Latin, they don't use Latin. I disagree. I think Jews use Latin, they knew Latin. But on the surface of it, definitely if you compare it to Jews in the East, Latin was harder to penetrate into the Jewish realm. And the reason is obvious. They saw this as the language of the church. The religious divide was too large to jump over. Now, you would have imagined that the moment that we shift into German, into the vernacular, Jews could hop aboard. No more need of Hebrew. They could now write, read in German. So let's see what happened when German takes the lead in charters. First of all, we see the same thing. We see the same kind of text. I, the undersigned, admit that all is written above in Aramaic language is true. He calls the German Aramaic. This is not, it's not very significant. We have that in English in England as well. We call the Latin Aramaic before. We have that elsewhere. It's the language, the non-Jewish language. Yeah. But then we see that these short lines of attestation, they migrate. They no longer appear on the page, but they start appearing first on the fold, as you see here on the right, on the fold of the document, and later on the back, like the example here. The arrow moved, but the example, you can see the Hebrew on it. The same type of text that I call attestation clauses. But then appears a different type of writing. Again, we saw this elsewhere. We have it in Spain, we have it in England, we have it elsewhere. It's a matter of proportions. All of a sudden, we have these short lines on the back of the documents that aren't attestation clause. These lines are shelf marks, you might say. This is a short explanation of what's in the charter. You have the name of the debitor, you have the sum, you have the dates, and you have the collateral, if there was one, or Arev, Talia, how do you say Arev? The guarantor, the name of the guarantor. Thank you. So these obviously are catalog notes that the author wrote for himself in order to preserve the charter. He doesn't have to open it. He knows what it is. He has a date. He could organize them according to dates. He could organize them according to guarantor or dates, whatever he wants. And we have more and more of such notes. And in 15th century, you see the presentation of how these notes work. This is a theme that's very current in the 15th century. The tax collectors or the bankers, and I took this off the internet somewhere. You have a whole bunch of these pictures of the tax collector, and every time you have a bunch of deeds somewhere on the shelf, he has to organize them in a box. So we see more and more of these aids of organizing the charters. We had this before. I have it from the 11th century in Spain. We have these notes elsewhere. But what changes here is that the proportion. There's some example of these, many examples of these, and now I'm working on the languages in these short lines, because the language, sometimes it's 5 different languages in the same line within a Hebrew syntax. But if we list these things this is from Vienna, from 1300 to 1350, and we have on the left, you have bilingual deeds, Hebrew and Latin, and then you have Hebrew shelf marks on the fold, and then you have Hebrew shelf mark at the back. We could see a constant move, and towards the end of the period, 70% of the Hebrew writing on documents is on the back in our shelf marks, which I will call self marks, because it's something that the owner of the deed wrote for his own use. So my point is extremely clear here. When the vernacular rises, Hebrew migrates from the front of the deed to the back, disappears from view, you might say, and is transformed into a private language between the Jew and himself. It has no more place in the public sphere. It doesn't represent the Jew, it's not needed and not used. Funny enough, at the same time, exactly at the same time, and this will be my last point, this is a time when we start to see charters written in Hebrew letters, but the content is German. So this, what you see in front of you, is German, written in Hebrew letters. This is a well-known phenomenon from around the Middle Ages. Jews used the vernacular languages while writing them in Hebrew letters. These languages are called Judeo-whatever, Judeo-Arabic, the whole Cairo Geniza. Text written in Arabic, but in Hebrew letters. Judeo-Castilian, Judeo-Greek. Delange published a beautiful book, Judeo-Greek, found in the Cairo Geniza. Judeo-Italian, Judeo-Castilian, Judeo-Provençal. Cyril Slanov published a dictionary. Judeo-German. This is Judeo-German. This language eventually will be what we call today Yiddish, for example, when it migrates and moves out of these territories to different territories, evolves, changes, it's a new language. The Judeo-Castilian is transformed into Ladino or Judismo, when the Jews take this language to Turkey and Greece and other languages and use it there. But at the same time, at the second half of the 14th century, is when we start seeing these text documents in German and Hebrew letters. And they replace the Hebrew documents. So what happened here is, I think, I'll be happy to hear your opinion, is that when finally Jews have this opportunity to take part in the non-Jewish culture through a shared language, through the vernacular, through the German, they choose, again, this is a linguistic choice that is rooted in the visual. They choose to raise the bar, to raise the fence between Jews and Christians by using the Hebrew letters, which is unreachable, unreadable for the Christian, and is transformed into a Judeo language. It has Hebrew words into it. So this is another example from later on from the 15th century. So if I wanted some thoughts to leave you with thoughts here, and again, after the Q&A, really look at these documents. The bilingual documents, they are visually representative of Jews and Christians and relations between them. We can do a lot with it. They point first to a very important conclusion. That's the secular use of Hebrew. We tended to think in all the textbooks that I read, I won't mention names, but Hebrew was a religious language that was used by the rabbinic elite, and they knew it. Zionism started the secular use of Hebrew. Here we have 10th century secular Hebrew, vivid one, that translates from Latin, from Aramaic. And this is one thing. And we also learn about the place of Hebrew within Christian environment. And we see how if we do this transnational history, we move from Catalonia to Vienna, we see how Hebrew moves from an accepted language that could function freely within Latin society into a marginalized language, visually marginalized, moved to the margin and migrates to the back of the document, and is transformed into a private language, which is not exactly Hebrew. It's sort of, I don't know what it is. It's a mishmash of languages. When the vernacular languages rise and they offer an opportunity to the Jews to take part in the non-Jewish community, Jews refuse. Visually, again, they refuse by choosing the Hebrew letters to correspond in the vernacular. And this leads to the last, extremely important, for me at least, this is something that I discovered. From the 10th century to the 15th century, the identity marker of the Jews is not the language. It's not Hebrew, it's not Aramaic. They shift from one language to another. It's the Hebrew letters. And this is a visual identity marker. This is something that people could see. This was something that Christian art in the 17th century will mark in the synagogues, the holy names of God and everything. So this, in the medieval culture, though this is a culture that moves from orality to literacy, and we see the rise of bureaucracy, and we see the implications and implementation of the literacy, still, even at the end of the Middle Ages, it's still a very visual identity that is marked by the letters, not by the content. Jews could write in Italian, in French, in Latin and German, but they will write in Hebrew letters, because in this visual culture. This is their identity marker. Sign. Done. Thank you.
That was dazzling. Thank you so much. We are a lot of places and a lot of time there.
Yeah.
Amazing. The floor is open for questions. We can take questions from the room and we can take questions online. Arthur, here on first question.
Thank you, Micha. I wonder about, I just want to explore two terms that you've used. One of them is secular or secular use of Hebrew, and the other is the notion of vernacular. You talk about various vernaculars. Is there such a thing as Judeo-Latin?
Yes.
There is Judeo-Latin.
Yeah.
There are Jews that write the Latin language in Hebrew characters.
Yeah, there is. There is most of it. First of all, we know about it from other sources. The best example is the polemic literature when they cite the New Testament.
Right.
It's written Latin, written in Hebrew letters.
In this context, in the contractual context,
We have words, Latin words written in Hebrew letters. Yes.
Latin words. Which words are written?
The technical words and names of places and people and topology, not topology, yes, topology, and technical words. Taxes, for example, provision. The Latin provision, provisio, is written in Hebrew letters. Other technical terms.
The reason what's behind my question is that I was taught that, unlike Arabic, Latin, of course, in the language and the intimacy of the Christian Jewish polemic is such that Jews did not regularly resort to writing Latin in the Hebrew alphabet in the way that they did it in an Islamic context.
It's true to a degree.
So I just wonder about, to say that something's written in Italian in Hebrew letters, or Spanish in Hebrew letters, or German in Hebrew letters. It seems to me those are the symbolic meaning of the letters changes when the religious context changes, and that, of course, everything that you've shown us is in a Christian environment. We haven't seen examples from an Islamic environment. In southern Spain, for example, we find such things. And so I just was trying to understand about this, the boundaries of the ways in which this Christian environment particularly shaped, and this is your argument, of course, but just to bring out more this idea of what secular and vernacular mean when Latin has a different valence altogether.
So first of all, I think we have to approach this question first, and the deeds in general, these deeds, when people ask me, who could read this Hebrew? Nobody could read this Hebrew. Who could read this Hebrew? So I ask, who could read the Latin? The same goes to the Latin. There's a professional scribe who writes the Latin, and he could read it, but the practitioners many times couldn't read it. It was inaccessible for them. The same goes to Hebrew. And the same goes here to languages. First of all, the distinction between Latin and vernacular, especially in the early Middle Ages, is very hard. When they say, I'll take a medieval word, cordonnier, the French word to designate shoemaker, right? You have it in medieval Latin as well. Are they quoting the French, the Latin, and Wright showed that 10th century Spain, the Latin is a vernacular Latin. Before the Carolingian unification of Latin. So at least in the early Middle Ages, distinguish between Latin and other languages is very hard. It's Romans, not German. And Jews take part in this culture. We were taught that Jews didn't access Latin. I'm not talking about writing. This is a different question. But they didn't read Latin. And they didn't have access. Everyone dealing with this document, and I had the same conversation with Judith Sanger-Olshovi, will admit Jews read Latin 100%. There's no chance that they will sign these documents without knowing what's written in them. When you speak 11th century French, like Rashi could also read Latin. It's not Thomas Aquinas, right? It's the document. I could read it, and I'm not a great Latinist. Everybody could read it. I remember studying at the École des Hautes Études with Alain Bourreau, and he takes a Latin book, Olivier, and he starts reading it, and he doesn't even notice that it's in French grammar already. He reads it like French. I didn't understand if it's in Italy. It sounds like Italian. So they read it. They could understand it to some degree. It's not difficult in Latin. And I think that they did have an understanding that these are secular texts, that this is not church, Christian theology, though the charters are full of theology. They have all kind of, curses and anathemas and etc. So they took part of it. And they didn't hear about the prohibition to teach your children Latin or Greek. These people weren't all rabbis; they were economics, and they had to do it. I don't understand even your question. We have the documents. They use it, they read it, they sign it. Do I have proof that they wrote Latin? No, but they didn't have to write it. We have enough documents in Latin that Jews, use without any Hebrew at all. We have these documents. We have a 13th century Ozaru, a rabbi in Vienna. Two Jews approach him and they say, we have an argument about this house, right? He says, okay. One of them says, here, I have a Latin contract that I've done in Latin. He won't accept it. The Jewish rabbi won't accept it, according to Jewish law. But the fact of the matter is that they had a Latin document and they went to the Latin notary to use it. So the problem is the evidence. We were prisoners of, let's say, of the rabbis, of the elite, who told us that Jews don't read Latin. And if you see a Latin, Bible, you have to tear it apart. Like Ravia says, to tear it up. But we have all these documents. This is a huge gap between, what people say and what happens.
Let's jump to the chat and then we'll come back to Thais. But Brigitte, who's cited in this talk, has a question. Brigitte, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you to you, Micha, for an absolutely illuminating talk. And not only because you showed these documents, but because of what you had to say about them. So I may take you a little bit from the issue of linguistic and letter symbolism, because I would like to ask you the extent to which the presence of Hebrew on medieval documents might have had an effect on their letter archival and conservation. And the reason I'm asking this question is that, as you know, and maybe you will not confirm it, but my experience is that I cannot find documents in the French archives with Hebrew on them. I don't find, and I'm not talking about Provence now, I'm talking about northern France, where Jewish communities were well established, Champagne and Artois and everywhere. And we just have nothing left, nothing comparable to what you showed us for Catalonia, for England, of course, for Germany and Austria, and you left Italy aside for different reasons. So I would like to ask you what you make of this absence of Hebrew Jewish documents from medieval France in the context of what's known of a rich Jewish life in medieval France.
So, first of all, thank you very much, Brigitte. It's a pleasure to hear you. I can't see you so much. And it's an honor that you're here. Two things. First of all, I always thought, until you just asked me my question, that the reason that we don't have Hebrew in northern French, Ile-de-France, in the region, is because of the French Revolution. That many documents were destroyed. We
No,
don't
no,
have
no.
that.
Well, Matthias Dreyfus just wrote this extraordinary book called Aux sources juives de l'histoire de France. He's been looking at the ways in which, from the medieval period, French people, first monks and then others, have dealt with Jewish sources in the kingdom and then in the Republic. And he has very little to say about the medieval period. And in some ways, he explains the absence of Jewish documents with the notion that they were perhaps considered to be ephemera, a quit claim. And therefore, but that, would apply also to Catalonia, Germany, Austria, and England. So that's, I'm sorry, I know I'm taking you a little bit away from the topic.
It's a wonderful question. It's a wonderful question because it's really, first of all, it makes me think. But there is, so England had a very special, system of preservation. You had the archive, they had a box where they kept copies of everything. You had the King Rose where they afterward preserved everything. And because there weren't enough documents in France, I basically didn't study the topic. But what I know about French bureaucracy, I know from your books, I know from Paul Bertrand.
Yes.
The book on the lowland and Belgium. And it seemed to me that, first of all, Jews were expelled, in 1305. Very few came back to northern France. So 14th century, you don't have any more Jews. Jews do appear in tax lists from Paris, 13th century, but no Hebrew. There is a quit claim. There is
one.
There's one, yes, but it's not a lot. It's one or two. Yes, I think that you have your intuition is extremely correct. There might have been a different attitude to Hebrew, and it influenced when these things were collected and archived. They were seen negligible. They were seen not worthy of preservation. I tell you what we can do. We can go over. There's a problem. Jewish law, responsa barely speaks of these documents. Just that, by the way, like Latin law, I found barely any legislation that says, what do you do when a Hebrew documents come to court?
Yeah, I was going to ask you that.
Do you mean that, Micha, do you mean that for France? Because I found a response for Catalonia, where
Right.
actually it is said that a Jewish document can be equivalent to a notarial document in court.
Rashba,
This is in the Fueros, yeah, and then it's endorsed by the King Count of.
Right. The Jewish scribe is like he was appointed. The Jewish scribe was appointed by the king, and he could write. By the way, it says not only Hebrew, also Arabic. But around 13th century, he writes also in Arabic. The scribe, he has to know Arabic, but still, there's much more documents than legislation, neither Jewish nor Christian. And the responsa hardly pops up. There's one responsa recently published by Rabbi Yitzchak the Old, the nephew of Rabbeinu Tam, that he talks about the documents that come from England. And he says that the documents that come from England are unique, are different than those, and he lives in Champagne somewhere. This is Dampierre, yeah. So I'll send you this response. This is interesting. He says,
Thank
he
you.
notes that there's a difference in the authenticity of the documents coming from England than those in France. And I think that he says that the reason is that there's a stronger monarch in England. The system is better. But listen, you got me thinking. I didn't have any documents. I didn't study France.
I know you don't have any. It's very frustrating. But thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Brigitte. Let's go to back to the room. Let's go to Talia. And speak up enough so that.
This was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have two comments and two questions. One comment had to do with your framing of your discussion of the notion writing was associated with the devil, the menacing force. And of course, my first visual association is really the synagogue versus ecclesia image, where synagogue always has a scroll that is falling down.
Or the tablets.
I think it's part of the same law versus spirit, perhaps, or text versus spirit, perhaps. But that's a comment. Another comment, I had some thoughts on why all foreign non-Hebrew languages are called Aramaic. I think it's probably more Aramean. And you probably call this through, so.
No, go ahead.
But if you think about the line, Arami obeyed Abi, there are two meanings. Either my father was a wandering Aramean, or an Aramean sought to make naught, to destroy my father, which would mean that all foreigners are essentially that type of trying to destroy my father. So that's just the bottom line. Aramean rather than Aramaic, because in Hebrew it's the same.
Right.
Okay, my questions. One is a very small question. I was under the impression that in many lands, not England, definitely, but that in many lands like Germany and Austria, the Jews were not permitted to own land. And if they were not permitted to own land, and that could be a false assumption on my part, then why would they even be involved in quitclaims? Because if land is part of collateral, there's something fishy. A Jew could not take a parcel of land as collateral for a loan if he was not permitted to own it. So that's a question.
Okay, so Jews own. First of all, this is I did a bit of a hack job here. I compared Catalonia in the 10th century to Vienna in the 15th century. Obviously, the situation, legal, economic, everything changed dramatically between these two times. But at the beginning of the Middle Ages, definitely in Spain, Jews owned land. This is one thing. All of the Barcelona document, the Catalonia document, they're all real estate, 100%. And the other thing is that now I could see everybody. Oh, Marcia. People I didn't see for years. So people took land as collateral. I'll remind you of Chaim Soloveitchik thesis of how Jews became involved in vineyards and trade because they took a vineyard as collateral. And it's not owning the land. Many times it's owning the product. They take the land as revenue, as the fruits. But Jews couldn't own land up from the 12th century onward, and in France, in Germany, not in Austria, not in Italy. Depends where and when. There's not a global prohibition of Jews to own land.
My second question has to do with the examples that you brought of the Hebrew writing moving to the back of the document as shelf notes. So I'm assuming that these documents were kept because these pertain to loans or debts or contracts that were pending. So wouldn't the Christian who is the other party to this contract, whatever sort it is, or also have shelf marks on the back that he keeps in his home or his archives?
So one question we didn't deal here, which is extremely important, is the preservation of these documents. How did they reach our hands? This is extremely important, and it changes from place to place. We have Latin shelf marks, but most of them are not by the owner. Most of them are by later years librarians or archivists that wrote something on it, documenting it. I assume that most of these documents arrived to Christian hands through either law cases, lawsuits, when they were given in as proof, as evidence, or when they were pertained to a third party. For example, in Catalonia, somebody bought a field, and when he bought a field, he had a whole dossier of documents. Within it will be one Hebrew one from 2 generations back. And these were eventually preserved only when this field got to the hands of a monastery, preserved it, eventually. And you have it somewhere. This is why people across Europe now are opening books. In Germany, the Grundbuch, the title books, they're opening them up and they're finding a lot of documents in it. Every day we have more and more documents. So the shelf mark were in use by the Jew in his house on the shelf. Eventually, this document with the shelf mark got to the hands of a library, an archive, a Christian somewhere, and we got it. Today, there's from Catalonia, there's beautiful examples of Latin documents between the king and whoever, and on the back, there's a Hebrew inscription, a shelf mark. So in some of these cases, I could show that this was probably the Jewish bailiff that wrote what it is for his own use, right? Other cases are cases where the Jew got this as pledge. Instead of taking as collateral a field, a house, a sword, a coat, he got a debt, right? So he cataloged, like, we have, I didn't mention this, but we have Hebrew inscriptions on Latin books. Beautiful Latin, book of hours. And you have within, you have a small Hebrew writing. Because the book was put as pledge. And this is Schatzmiller's book about commodity that Jews hold, Christian commodities that Jews had in their houses. And that was as pledge. So we always had to follow the chain of conservation, how it reached to us. This is extremely important in every case.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Let's go back to the Zoom, and Marcia, please.
Hello, Micha. What a wonderful talk. It's wonderful to see you, if only virtually for now. I have a question that's more a point of clarification about the later documents with, as Talia was saying, with the Hebrew on the back. So you were arguing that this is like a fence between that the Jews created for themselves. But then what I'm curious about is that because, did they themselves decide to write this on the back just because it was a shelf mark, or was Hebrew writing on documents in this time and place no longer acceptable by Christians as it had been in the earlier corpus from Catalonia that you showed? So I was just wondering if you could clarify whose decision and why. And
so first of all, I'm happy that we're talking about decisions and choices, because this is how I see it. It's not accidental, something that happened, and it's a cultural choice. My argument was twofold, meaning first part of the argument was that at this time Hebrew disappears from the front and migrates to the back. It's a matter of proportions here, because we have it before. It's not a new phenomenon, the shelf marks, but all of a sudden they become the lion's share of Hebrew on Latin documents. And here it's because that Hebrew became redundant in a way, and it was no longer a sign of honor and identity, and it was transformed into another vernacular language, a private language that the Jew used. So Hebrew disappeared on the charters. because it was in the vernacular. But at the same time, Judeo-German appears. This is the fence that Jews brought. They don't stop using Hebrew and shift into German with Roman letters. They shift into German with Hebrew letters. Meaning all along the Middle Ages, Jewish identity is bound to Hebrew letters. Is it clear?
Yeah, so it's not the Christians who are quote unquote banishing the Hebrew from the document. It's that the Jews have this personal archival system they're using in their vernacular in Hebrew letters.
We still have up to the 15th century. I didn't look beyond. I imagine there's something beyond that. We still have Hebrew functioning by itself within the Latin system, not the Latin, the non-Jewish, but it's less and less.
Mhm.
Because the communication is in the vernacular.
And then,
Yes.
So then my last question is, I suppose, speculative. I'm wondering if you think there's any way you might extrapolate from your study to the presence of Hebrew letters in illuminations or miniatures in manuscripts, which are supposed to identify Jews, so I'm wondering if you think that your study will have an impact on how scholars approach that question.
So first of all, I'm your student on this topic. You know, the work you've done on Mandeville and the presence of Hebrew in it. It's amazing. I also see here Adriana William Boyarian. We didn't talk ever, but her work on Mary in England is also extremely important. And I hope that, yes, scholars of literature and of art will definitely will take this into consideration. The mere fact that Hebrew is omnipresent on the streets of London. It really is. We have all these documents. Just imagine, the documents that we have should be less than a tenth of what actually was there. Because such documents, the moment a house was sold again, a debt was paid, these documents were destroyed, no longer needed. The only reason to preserve them is because they came into a royal, urban, or a monastery archive. And they got into those places, usually, you know, England a bit different, accidentally, because the king wanted to follow the debts, because there was a lawsuit in France, mainly lawsuits. So we have to imagine that this is 1% of all the documents that were visual to people there. So I would imagine that, yes, that when you look at these manuscripts that portray Hebrew, sort of, they had an idea of these letters. Judith Schlange-Olshovi could recognize a Christian hand writing Hebrew, a Christian hand, according to the strokes of the pen. That this is somebody who was used to write from left to right and not from right to left. So they identified this. And then you have, you know, all of a sudden, all these portrayals of Hebrew, the name of the Lord, you know, Yud Hey Vav Hey, and all kind of manuscripts, and Hebrew letters. You know what? Bede, bead, you call them, right, in English. Venerable Bede has Hebrew letters in his manuscripts. They're present there in England, in Anglo-Saxon England. People knew them and copied them. We have Hebrew, you know, Julie Schlange again published this trilingual document dictionary from England, Hebrew, French, Latin. We have, this is amazing. Hardly anybody worked with from Catalonia, there's a glossary of Hebrew and Latin and Catalan, 3 languages, which is definitely not a biblical glossary. The only one who worked at it was Michel Zimmerman, who worked on these documents. It's bizarre. It has extremely bizarre Hebrew words for house, wind, all kind of bizarre words. So yes, they're present, and I think this would change the way how we look at about Hebrew. There's a lot of work on pseudo-Hebrew, all these incantations in French medieval literature, in Rothbuff and Gautier of Quincy, Abba, Gaba, Taba, all kind of gibberish that's supposed to be so visually as well. Sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you. And there's a quick note in the chat here from Adrienne pointing out, going back to Michael Clancy's classic study, suggesting that indebted landowners in England would have seen more writing in Hebrew than in Latin. So I was going to ask about Clancy, and that's an interesting point.
First of all, Clancy's book is the personal reference of whoever writes about charters and cultural history. This is an amazing book from the end of the 70s. And he devoted quite a lot to Hebrew deeds. He writes about this, about the transition from Anglo-Saxon to Latin and then to French and English later. So he says, as Randy mentioned, he says that people were more likely to see Hebrew than English in 13th century England. And that is true. Thank you.
Question from Louise on Zoom. Go ahead.
Hi, Micha. Just want to join everybody in thanking you for this wonderful talk. There is something that puzzles me in your talk. You claim that Hebrew is a secular language as used in these documents. Wonderful. That the Hebrew letters are used as signs of identity for Jews. Perfect. But then you said Jews signed in Hebrew letters, which is basically a parallel to Christians using all kinds of cross symbols, which implies that this is actually a holy and religious meaning. So actually you're claiming two opposing things. On the one hand, this is a sign of secular identity. On the other side, this is something parallel to a holy sign, which, and I mean, there is this understanding of Hebrew letters as being holy, so it would actually square in, but it doesn't square in with your other conclusions.
Right. So there's, we were also taught that there's no secularism in the Middle Ages, and I would agree they're not. But I have two answers for you. The second answer is that first of all, you're right. It's religious, but it's not. It's more religiosity than religion. Meaning, it's not. It's their identity as Jews. So medieval Jews will be identified as Jews. It's not ethnically, it's not culturally, it's not religiously. They identify themselves as Jews through this letter, through the Bible, through whatever. They don't take Aramaic. Some of these documents, which documents from the Talmud onward were in Aramaic. This is the scholarly language of the Jews. No, they translated into Hebrew, which is biblical. So there is a Jewish identity, which is, it's not secular, but it's not also halachically religious, according to Jewish law. It's larger than that. Like the cross is not, it's a Christian sign, but it's not a law. It's a symbol of identity. It's larger than religion in a way. This is the second answer. The first answer is, I contradicted myself. I do that a lot. That's my wife. Thank you.
And I just wanted to add one thing to Talia's question, that Jews could own land also in Austria or the German lands in the Middle Ages.
Absolutely.
prohibition that just went into effect later.
We're getting close to time, but I
Yeah.
feel like I'd love to just ask, I don't know. if
I
this
don't want
is
to
a-
hold everybody here.
Well, I don't know if this is a quick question, but I'd love to sort of return maybe as a last thought to the materiality of the documents. I feel like we heard that these charters are talked about a lot of different kinds of documents, mainly charters. Clearly, right, they have an archival function. They're stored and they're taken out at times of legal use. But it sounds like there's also a thread running through here about how some of these documents, at least, are public and portable and transported. And the art examples and the blood libel example, you know, these kind of suggest that there's something also public about them, which is, to me, at least, maybe I'm wrong here, a little different than their documents as storage and archival. I don't know if there's anything in there to play with.
Look at them. Look at them. These are beautiful objects. Some of them are monumental, but even the small ones are beautiful objects. And some of them you can't even read. So definitely, you know, when you have a piece of paper, you're covered. Doesn't matter what's written on it in a way. And you see, it's a development of this bureaucracy of proof. You see, at the beginning of the Middle Ages, if somebody has a document, right, and there's a dispute of land, and you go in front of the judge will scroll down with his finger all the way to the bottom and say, here are the witnesses, call them. So the paper is just a support for an oral performance. There was a whole, I didn't go into this, but behind the composition of these documents, there was a ritual where in property documents, there was a whole ceremony in Catalonia where you, now it's called in English, the beating of the bounds or something. You walk around the field, we talked about Dalia, and you take out the cross from the church and you make the benedictions and the witnesses take a solemnly oath. The writing down of the document is just an enlargement of the testimony, sort of. So it's part of a whole context that we today stand with this peak of the iceberg and we say, this is it. But like archaeology, we have this one, small brick in the wall, and we have to construct the whole building. The whole building was much more than a text. It was performance, it was ritual, it was presentation, showing it, showing off of it, holding it. Yeah, I think you're right.
Can you call these ephemeral? Were they meant to be understood as ephemeral?
So
Just the ones we have here are, I don't know the status of paper in Northern Europe in the 10th century.
Parchment.
but these are parchments.
Yeah, that's my point. These are parchment, and the seals that are on them, that they are a record of a transaction that's meant to be memorialized in some sense, to be taken out in case there's a dispute. So is there any
So
sense in
first of all,
which-
this is the first place where you're wrong. No, they were
No, they're
not.
never to be taken out.
No, they were taking out in cases of dispute, but this is something that becomes, it's not a reality. They were written down as part of a transaction, as part of an act. How are they called in English? This is a deed.
Okay,
And in French, it's an acte. This is something that you do.
right?
So they weren't put down to writing in order to be preserved as proof somewhere. Somewhere in a cultural memory from Roman times, right? We have this practice that this is what you do when you sell land. This is what you do when you transfer inheritance. And you have the scribes doing this over and over again with the same formulas. And they forgot the main, during the early Middle Ages, they forgot the main thing to do, that is deposited in an archive. In Roman times, you wrote a document, the most important thing was to put it in the archive. That's how it was done, the deed. In medieval times, at the early medieval times, there were no archives. People kept them at home or something.
Well, the word deed isn't mean literally us.
Right,
Do.
right.
but-
Right.
but I just want to make clear, and forgive me, John, but are you saying, could you just clarify the temporality? are these meant to be, should we understand in a medieval sense that these are ephemeral documents?
No.
Or that no, they're not ephemeral.
No, I don't think so. Bridget used that ephemeral because some of them are tiny, tiny notes. Some of them in England, it's notes sent to somebody, right? Do this and that and then destroy it. But at the end of the Middle Ages, you're 100% right. They were served as proof. You know, when I opened, I had this definition of what is a practical document. It could be it changes status, but it could be an witnessing of a change of status, or it could perform the change of status. And this is the difference. Today you sign a document, this performed the change of status. Right? In the Middle Ages, they witnessed something that happened. And it's sort of a prolonged memory. This is what what's his name? The Gutenberg's galaxy. McLuhan. Called the extension of the senses. So this is my voice as a witness extended to prosperity, to other people, to a distance. And in that sense, the important thing is my voice. And this is proof of my voice. At the end of the Middle Ages, it changes. It becomes, this is the important thing.
Thank you.
Well,
I think this is, she knows.
I think we need to conclude at least
Yeah.
the formal
Please.
part here, but with some thank yous. And
Thank you very much.